My sister-in-law smiled at me the whole time she was doing it. That's the part I still can't shake. Not the money. Not the credit cards. Not even the fact that she did it while I was sleeping in the next room with a 7-month-old baby who woke up twice a night and needed me every single hour of every single day. It's the smile. The way she'd set a plate of food in front of me and ask how I was holding up, and I'd say fine, just tired, and she'd nod like she actually cared. She didn't care. My husband's name is Nathan. He's a contractor, not construction, the other kind. Government contracts, overseas. He'd been in Qatar for 6 weeks when everything started. And when I say I was already running on empty, I mean that in the most literal way possible. Our daughter Ivy had just hit a growth spurt and wasn't sleeping. I was nursing and exhausted and trying to keep it together in our apartment in Columbus while Nathan video called whenever the time difference allowed, which wasn't often enough. His sister Faye had offered to help. I want to be precise about how she offered, because it matters. She didn't just say, "Let me know if you need anything." She called me on a Tuesday evening while Ivy was screaming in the background and said, "I've been thinking about this a lot. I have a 2-bedroom condo and I'm barely there. You shouldn't be alone right now. Come stay with me. I'll help with the baby. You can save on rent for a few months while Nathan's gone, and you'll have company." She said it like it was obvious, like of course this was the right thing, like she'd already thought through all the angles and it just made sense. And honestly, it did seem to make sense. Our apartment lease was month to month. We'd been talking about moving to a better neighborhood before Ivy started crawling. Faye's condo was in a nicer part of Dublin, close to a park, close to a pediatrician we both liked. Nathan thought it was a great idea. His exact words were, "Faye's always been the responsible one. I'm glad you two will have each other." I should have asked more questions. We moved in on a Saturday. Faye helped me carry boxes, cooed over Ivy, made us both laugh. She'd set up a room for us with a white noise machine already plugged in and a little basket of baby things on the dresser. Diapers, wipes, a soft blanket and Ivy's favorite yellow. I stood in the doorway and thought, this is going to be okay. This is actually going to be okay. It took about 3 weeks for the shape of things to reveal itself. It started small, the way those things always do. Faye asked if she could add herself to our joint account just temporarily, so she could pick up groceries without having to transfer money back and forth. Nathan and I had a joint account we used for household stuff, nothing huge in it, a couple thousand, and I said yes without really thinking about it. She was helping with groceries. It seemed reasonable. Then she mentioned that Nathan had told her she could handle some of the logistics while he was gone. Bill sorting, that kind of thing. I didn't remember Nathan saying that, but when I mentioned it on our next call, the connection was bad and he said something like, "Yeah, whatever makes things easier. I trust you guys," and I took that as confirmation even though I shouldn't have. Here's what was actually happening, and I only know this in full now because of what came out later. Faye had been going through my physical mail, which had been forwarded to her condo address when we moved in. She'd found a credit card I'd opened 2 years ago and barely used. A travel card had maybe a $12,000 limit, and she'd called the company, said she was handling account changes on my behalf, and had the address and login credentials updated. She'd also added herself as a joint account holder on our bank account rather than just getting deposit access, which is different. Very different. And she'd done it with a forged signature. I didn't know any of this. What I knew was that Ivy wasn't sleeping again, that I hadn't showered properly in 4 days, that Nathan was calling less because the project was in a crunch phase, and that Faye was being so helpful. She'd watch Ivy for an hour while I napped. She'd bring me coffee in the morning without being asked. She'd talk to me about Nathan, about how proud she was of him, about how hard it must be to be apart. I felt guilty every time I felt even the smallest flash of irritation with her. The first concrete sign that something was wrong came in week 7. I tried to use our debit card at the grocery store. It declined. I thought it was a bank glitch. They happen, so I used my credit card instead and figured I'd sort it out when I got home. But when I logged into the account on my phone, I didn't see a glitch. I saw a balance of $214. We'd had over $4,000 in that account. My heart did something strange when I saw that number. Not panic. Not yet. More like a drop. Like when you're stepping off a curb you didn't see. I checked the transaction history. There were Venmo transfers I didn't recognize, not to Faye's name, but to accounts I didn't know. There were Zelle payments. There was a $600 charge at a furniture store I'd never been to, a $340 charge at a restaurant I'd never visited, and then at the top of the list, dated 4 days ago, 11 Lin 100 transfer labeled household expenses that Faye had initiated. I stood in the kitchen while Ivy napped and I read through that list 3 times. I didn't go to Faye right away. I don't know if that was instinct or exhaustion, but something told me not to show my hand before I understood what hand I was holding. I took screenshots of everything. Then I called Nathan. He didn't pick up. I texted him, "Call me when you can, something's off with the account." Then I sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets and just breathed for a minute. Faye came home around 6:30. She'd brought takeout, Thai food, my favorite. She set it on the counter and started unpacking containers and asking me how Ivy's afternoon had been and whether I'd managed to get any rest. And I looked at her, this woman who had been helping me with my baby for 2 months, who had brought me coffee and held my daughter and smiled at me across the dinner table. And I said very calmly, "Faye, can you tell me what happened to the money in our account?" She didn't flinch. That's what scared me most. She didn't flinch at all. She said, "Oh, I had to cover some things this week. I was going to tell you." Like it was a minor detail she'd been meaning to get around to. Like $3 to $800 was a rounding error. I asked her to be specific. She said something about the HOA bill coming in, about some expense related to Nathan's car insurance that apparently she'd been handling, about how she'd been meaning to sit down with me and go over everything but just hadn't found the time. It was the most casual conversation I'd ever had about a significant sum of money disappearing from my account. That night I didn't sleep, not because of Ivy. Ivy slept fine. I lay in the dark next to her little breathing body, and I went through everything in my head. Tried to figure out what I actually knew versus what I was afraid of. Tried to figure out what I could call. My brother, Derek, is 8 years older than me. He's a CPA. He's the person in our family who gets called when something financial goes wrong, when someone doesn't understand their taxes, when my aunt had a situation with a contractor who overbilled her. He's not loud about any of it. He just knows things, and he knows people, and he is very, very methodical. I called him the next morning while Faye was at work. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is his way. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment and then he said, "Okay, don't touch anything. Don't confront her again. Can you get me access to the account?" I added him as a read-only viewer. He said he'd call me back. He called me back in 2 hours. What he'd found, even from that limited access, was enough to make him tell me to pack a bag. The transfers weren't random, they were systematic. Small enough to avoid automatic fraud flags, regular enough to suggest they'd been going on longer than I realized. He'd also cross-referenced the dates and found that some of the outgoing transfers lined up with periods when Nathan and I had minimal contact, as if someone had been watching for windows when I'd be least likely to notice. He asked me if I knew Faye had added herself as a joint account holder. I didn't. He asked me if I'd signed anything since moving in. I said I'd signed a few things she put in front of me. Subletting paperwork she said was standard. Something about car insurance I hadn't read closely. He said, "I need you to get out of that house today." I don't know how people pack their whole situation into a bag in 2 hours, but I did it. I folded Ivy's clothes into our suitcase, broke down her pack and play, loaded it and the car seat and the diaper bag and 3 other bags into my car. Oh, my car! Which was in my name and which Faye had apparently tried and failed to have transferred because I'd never given her the title, and I drove to Derek's house 40 minutes away. I sat in his driveway with Ivy asleep in the back seat and I called Nathan. This time he picked up. I talked for a long time. I cried partway through it, which I hadn't expected to do. Nathan was quiet in a way that I'd never heard him be quiet before. Not the quiet of bad signal, but the quiet of someone who is trying very hard to stay controlled when they are not feeling controlled at all. He asked me once, "Are you safe?" And I said yes. And he said, "Okay, stay with Derek. I'm going to handle this." Nathan and Faye's relationship is not my story to tell in full. What I'll say is that Nathan knew things about his sister that he'd never told me. Patterns going back years, a situation in college, a cousin who'd had a similar experience and hadn't pressed it because of family pressure. He believed Faye had changed. He believed his own hope more than the evidence in front of him, and he knew that now, and he had to sit with it from 12 time zones away, which I don't imagine was easy. Derek, meanwhile, was doing what Derek does. He'd already contacted a fraud attorney, a woman named Miss Harlan, who specialized in financial crimes and family-related fraud, which is apparently its own subspecialty because it's that common. He pulled together documentation, screenshots, account histories, the timeline of transfers. He'd also reached out to someone he knew at the county DA's office, not to file anything yet, just to understand what we were looking at. What we were looking at was wire fraud, identity fraud, and forgery. The signatures on the account paperwork weren't mine. The credential changes on the credit card had been made without authorization. The Venmo and Zelle transfers had gone partially to accounts connected to Faye's boyfriend, a man I'd met twice at family dinners and never thought about much. The credit card balance was $9,400. I hadn't charged a single dollar of it. The thing about being the victim of financial fraud by someone you lived with, someone you trusted, someone who held your baby, it doesn't feel the way you'd expect it to. You'd think rage would be the main thing. And there's rage, yes. But underneath it is something quieter and harder to name. A kind of vertigo. Because you keep replaying every moment and trying to find where you should have seen it, what signal you missed, what question you didn't ask. You audit yourself instead of them at first. It took me a while to stop doing that. Faye wasn't arrested immediately. These things move slowly, which nobody tells you. Ms. Harlan filed a police report with documentation. The bank's fraud department opened an investigation, and we waited. Faye apparently realized something had shifted when I disappeared and didn't respond to her texts. She called Nathan. He didn't answer. She called his parents and told them some version of events that I'm told was creative. His mother called me twice. I didn't answer either. Nathan came home 6 weeks early. He had to negotiate it with his contracting company, had to give up a portion of his completion bonus, and he never once complained about that to me. He walked into Derek's living room on a Thursday afternoon and he sat down next to me on the couch and he said, "I am so sorry. I should have seen this coming, and I didn't protect you. And I'm sorry." Ivy was on the floor between us doing the thing she'd just learned to do, where she pushes up on her arms and looks around like she's surveying her kingdom. She looked up at Nathan, and her face did the thing babies do when they recognize someone, that full body lighting up. And he picked her up and held her against his chest, and I watched him close his eyes. That was a hard moment and also somehow a good one. The legal process took several months. I won't make it seem faster or neater than it was because it wasn't. There were depositions. There were conversations with the bank that required a lawyer present. There were moments when I genuinely didn't know how it would resolve. Here's how it resolved. Faye was charged with wire fraud, identity theft, and 2 counts of forgery. Her boyfriend was charged as a co-conspirator. The accounts the money had moved through were in his name, and he'd spent a portion of it, which made his involvement impossible to argue away. They both took plea deals, rather than going to trial. Faye was sentenced to 22 months in federal prison with 3 years of probation to follow. Her boyfriend received 14 months. As part of the plea, restitution was ordered, the full $9,400 on the credit card and the $3,800 from the bank account, plus interest and fees that the bank had added. The credit card company, after the fraud investigation concluded, zeroed out the balance and removed the account from my credit report entirely. It took a long time to stop feeling like the ground might fall out from under me at any moment, longer than I expected. Even after everything was settled, even after Nathan was home and we'd moved into a house, an actual house, in the neighborhood we'd been talking about, with a yard Ivy would eventually be old enough to run around in. I'd still have moments, checking the bank account 3 times before bed, reading every piece of mail before I set it down, not letting anyone hold paperwork for me without reading it myself first, every word. Nathan's parents reached out after the sentencing. His mother sent a card. It said she was sorry and that she hoped we could find our way back to each other as a family someday. I thought about that card for a long time. I'm still thinking about it. Honestly, I don't have a clean answer about where we land with them. That's okay. Not everything needs a clean answer right now. What I know is this. Ivy is 14 months old and she's the kind of child who laughs at everything, who reaches her arms toward you before you've even picked her up, who is unfazed by most of what the world throws at her. I'm convinced she gets that from Nathan. He's the steadiest person I've ever met, and I used to take that for granted, and I don't anymore. Derek came over for dinner last month. He brought a bottle of wine and spent 45 minutes on the floor making Ivy laugh by stacking blocks and letting her knock them over. At one point, he looked up at me across the room and said, without much ceremony, "You did the right things. I just helped." That's Derek. He'll never not downplay it. But I want to be honest about something because I think it matters. I almost didn't call him. I almost convinced myself I was overreacting. I almost put the phone down that morning in Faye's condo and told myself the account thing was probably some miscommunication, that I was sleep deprived and reading too much into it, that I didn't want to make things awkward. The voice that says, "You're probably wrong, don't make a scene," is so loud when you're exhausted and isolated and living in someone else's space. I'm glad I didn't listen to it. If you're reading this and something feels off, in your account, in your mail, in the paperwork someone put in front of you and asked you to sign without giving you time to read it, please listen to that feeling. You're not overreacting. Call someone you trust. Read everything. Your instincts about the people in your life are usually right, and the ones that are wrong are worth examining out loud with someone who loves you. Ivy just started pulling herself up to standing. She'll let go for a second sometimes just to see what happens, and then she grabs back on. Watching her figure out what she can hold and what she has to let go of, I think about that more than I probably should. But that's the thing about going through something like this. It changes what you pay attention to. The thing I keep coming back to is the white noise machine. Faye had plugged it in before we even arrived. She thought ahead, bought the right kind, set it at the right volume for a baby. And for weeks I looked at that machine as evidence that she was good, that she cared. I let one small, thoughtful gesture become a reason to stop paying attention. I think about how many of the worst situations in life start exactly that way, not with a dramatic red flag, but with something that looks like kindness, something that makes you feel guilty for doubting it. Faye wasn't careless or impulsive. She was deliberate. The transfers were timed. The forgeries were practiced. She watched for the windows when Nathan and I had the least contact and she moved quickly inside them. That kind of calculation takes a certain intelligence. And I've had to sit with the uncomfortable truth that being deceived by someone smart doesn't mean you were foolish. It means you were trusting. And trusting is not the same thing as naive, even though the two can feel identical when you're standing in the wreckage. What saved me wasn't cleverness. It was the decision to make one phone call instead of talking myself out of it. I almost didn't call Derek. I've thought about that more times than I can count. The voice that said, "You're probably overreacting. Don't make this awkward," was loud and convincing. It sounded reasonable. It sounded like self-awareness. But it wasn't. It was fear dressed up as good judgment, and the only thing that cut through it was asking myself a single honest question. If I'm wrong, what do I lose by calling? And if I'm right, what do I lose by not? Derek did what Derek does. He didn't panic. He didn't make it dramatic. He looked at the facts, understood what they meant, and knew exactly what to do next. That steadiness, the ability to think clearly when the situation is anything but clear, is something I've watched him practice his whole life. He reads things carefully. He asks hard questions. He doesn't let how much he wants something to be true affect his judgment about what actually is true. I used to think that was just his personality. Now I understand it's a discipline, something he built, not something he was born with. And Nathan. Nathan gave up part of his bonus to come home early, and he never mentioned it except once, in passing, and only because I asked directly. He walked into Derek's living room, and the first thing he said was, "I'm sorry." Not an explanation, not a defense of his sister, just accountability, clean and immediate. That's its own kind of strength. The willingness to sit inside something painful without trying to escape it or redirect it onto someone else. What happened to Faye was the direct result of what she chose to do, not because the universe keeps score in some mystical way, but because actions have consequences that are real and traceable and inevitable. She built a structure out of lies, and it could only hold for so long before the weight of it collapsed inward. The documentation existed. The transfers were recorded. The signatures didn't match. Truth doesn't disappear just because someone is counting on you not to look for it. Ivy is pulling herself up to standing now. She falls sometimes and looks surprised every time, like she didn't expect gravity to still apply. Then she grabs back on and tries again. I think that's probably all any of us can do.